Hi, it's Kirby Summers, and I welcome you to the Epstein Project podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about two things. As you have probably heard, Bill Cosby was released from jail. Basically, he was told to go home, and you know, th- there are many of us who are upset, and it kind of brings back sort of like just this feeling of helplessness that we really don't have the ability to hold rapists accountable. However, at the time that I heard the news, my mind immediately went to Ghislaine Maxwell, and I'm like, I know she's going to try to do the same thing. So I'm going to review the situation with Bill Cosby, and then I'm going to read to you a letter that was submitted to Judge Nathan on behalf of Ghislaine Maxwell. Okay, so the news for Bill Cosby, I'm just going to read this to you. Bill Cosby was released from prison Wednesday after the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned his 2018 sexual assault conviction, upending the first high-profile case of the Me Too era. Cosby, 83, was convicted of sexually assaulting Andrea Constand, a former Temple University employee, at his home in 2004. In its opinion, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said a non prosecution agreement with a former prosecutor prevented Cosby from facing charges. The court said Bruce Castor, the former Montgomery County District Attorney, declined to prosecute the case and gave Cosby the assurance he would not be criminally prosecuted if he testified in a civil case brought by Constant. But Cosby testified that he gave quaaludes to women he had pursued for sex, evidence that Castor's successor, District Attorney Kevin Steele, used against him in 2015. Later, Cosby was convicted on 3 counts of indecent assault and sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. Okay, so then it goes on to say that they looked at this information and they decided that um, prosecuting Cosby violated his due process rights. And then it goes on to say there is only one remedy that can completely restore Cosby to the status quo. They argued he must be discharged, and any future prosecution on these particular charges must be barred. We do not dispute that this remedy is both severe and rare, but it is warranted and indeed compelled. All right, so that is why he was released. There had been a non prosecution agreement. I think you're familiar with that term as it pertains to Jeffrey Epstein. And now we have heard that term as it pertains to Bill Cosby. It seems that all these guys, they just get non prosecution agreements with the district attorney. And so that's something that I think should be looked into. So I am now going to read the letter that was submitted to Allison Nathan, who is the judge that is presiding over the case for Ghislaine Maxwell. So it's dated July 2nd. It was submitted yesterday. And it's Dear Judge Nathan, we respectfully submit this letter to bring the court's attention the recent decision by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania in Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus William Henry Cosby, in which the court vacated Mr. Cosby's conviction and sentence because the district attorney's office that prosecuted him failed to live up to its express promise not to prosecute Mr. Cosby for the same crimes for which he was later convicted. Miss Maxwell's case presents a similar situation, as we argued in our supplemental pretrial motions currently pending before the court. The government has failed to abide by its promise not to prosecute Miss Maxwell for the offenses for which she was immunized by the Epstein non-prosecution agreement. We submit that this decision provides support for Miss Maxwell's supplemental motion to dismiss counts 1 3, 5, and 6 of the S2 indictment for a violation of the NPA. In Cosby, Andrea Constant alleged that Mr. Cosby sexually assaulted her in his residence in January 2004. Ms. Constant did not immediately report the assault to law enforcement authorities and continued to have contact with Mr. Cosby in the following months. In January 2005, approximately 1 year after the assault, Ms. Constant reported Mr. Cosby's conduct to the police. The Montgomery County District Attorney's Office investigated the allegations, but then District Attorney Bruce Castor determined that there was insufficient credible and admissible evidence to bring criminal charges against Mr. Cosby. Among the factors weighing against bringing charges were that Miss Constant had waited a year to file her complaint, which diminished the reliability of Miss Constant's recollection. 2. Miss Constant's statements about the events were inconsistent. 3. There was a lack of corroborating evidence. 4. Miss Constant continued to speak and meet with Mr. Cosby after the assault. And 5. Miss Constant had contacted civil attorneys to pursue financial compensation through a lawsuit against Mr. Cosby. District Attorney Castor issued a signed public statement declining to prosecute Mr. Cosby, which he viewed and Mr. Cosby's lawyers understood to be an agreement that Mr. Cosby would never be prosecuted for the events involving Miss Constant. Believing that he no longer had a basis to assert his Fifth Amendment rights, Mr. Cosby testified at several depositions in a civil suit brought against him by Miss Constant and made I can't pronounce it. It made admissions. 10 years later, the successor District Attorney Risa Fetri Furman used those admissions to charge Mr. Cosby with the same related uh, sexual assault of Miss Constant that were covered by the district attorney's promise. Mr. Cosby was convicted of those charges at trial. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court held that District Attorney Castor's promise was enforceable and that District Attorney Furman's prosecution of Mr. Cosby 10 years later on the same charges violated his due process rights. As a result, the court vacated Mr. Cosby's conviction. In so holding, the court noted the following: interactions between a prosecutor and a criminal defendant, including circumstances where the latter seeks enforcement of some promise or assurance made by the former, are not immune from the dictates of due process and fundamental fairness. The same principle applies to Miss Maxwell's case. As in Cosby, the government is trying to renege on its agreement and prosecute Miss Maxwell over 25 years later for the exact offenses for which she was granted immunity in the non-prosecution agreement. Indeed, the principle applies even more strongly in Miss Maxwell's case because the NPA was a formal written agreement as opposed to an informal promise like the one in Cosby. This is not consistent with principles of fundamental fairness. Accordingly, for the reasons already set forth in our supplemental pretrial motions and the principles discussed in Cosby, the court should hold the government to its agreement and dismiss counts 1, 3, 5, and 6 of the S2 indictment. Thank you for your attention to these matters. Christian Everdell. Um, okay, so that is the latest on the Ghislaine Maxwell attempt to get out of jail free and pass go and collect, a $200 and never be held accountable for everything she did to help the whole human trafficking and blackmail crimes that have been committed for years and years and years and years, and which has affected more than the four people who are the victims in the case currently, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of victims that were ensnared in this case, as you have probably read through the years. It was sort of a pyramid scheme. They would get one girl, uh, a minor, to come in. They would go to a school, or they would chase after this child on the streets, or they would make a promise, oh, come here and do this, and then the person would be raped. And these were children, some of them were as young as 12. Um, we've heard the case about the 13-year-old triplets that were gifted to Jeffrey Epstein. So this is a world that was the world for Ghislaine Maxwell. She's only being charged for four of those victims, and again, only for a small segment of those crimes. She's been in jail as of yesterday for a full year, and she continues to ask for a different trial date, but she has requested five on five different occasions that she wanted to be released on bail. Judge Nathan refused every single time. The first court case was heard on July 14. I listened to it, and at that time, she presented the argument. Her attorneys presented the argument that based on Jeffrey Epstein's non prosecution agreement, she should be let go as well. And Judge Nathan said no. So, Judge Nathan has already said no to this a year ago. I'm going to hope that Judge Nathan says no to it again, and that we are spared the trauma of having the most uh, uh, the most despicable person, because not only it's not I have trouble wrapping my mind around it because she is a woman, and as a woman, I think us as women and even men, and of course her victims, who many of whom were just children when they were assaulted, we hold women to a higher standard. We trust women not to turn on another woman, and certainly not to turn on a child and not to hurt that child. So we need to have stronger voices. We need to be louder than the very expensive attorneys that Ghislaine Maxwell is able to afford. These attorneys are They're the same attorneys, by the way, used by the drug cartel kingpins, and just the most atrocious people. And so we just need to continue to apply the pressure. The reason that she was picked up and the reason Epstein was picked up, I believe, had to do with social media. We're able to talk about this. We're able to inform people that would not ordinarily know that this is happening right next door, because it was happening under our noses, right? Like, I live in New York City. Literally, there's only a park in between Jeffrey Epstein's New York City mansion and me. There's just one park. So if I walk through the park, I'm right there. And pretty much in the areas where he was conducting this operation, which again, we can't forget Alex Acosta's statement. He was working for intelligence in Palm Beach. There it was right around the corner from a lot of people. In France, right around the corner from a lot of people. Don't forget, we have Jean-Luc Brunel in jail right now. We need to keep these people in jail. We need to get more of them in jail. I would love to see Leslie Wexner in jail. I would love to see Prince Andrew in jail. I would love to see Bill Clinton in jail. I would love to see everyone who just decided to partake of human trafficked individuals. I mean, it's just, I'm so upset right now. Anyway, I'm going to calm down. I wanted to share this with you. Um, it's still the weekend, and it's the 4th of July weekend, so I do hope that you all have a wonderful 4th of July weekend and you get some rest. Um, but This is what's happening. Okay, talk soon. Have a good day. It's Kirby Summers for the Epstein Project podcast.